So let us begin, because that was a bit of a ramble, wasn't it? Just about my life. And let's start. So I'm going to turn off comments. Thank you, Lavinia. Thank you. Turn off comments, and we're going to begin. So I'm beginning with something just a little bit fun, really. This is a jolly jape to begin with, and then we're going to work our way up. So don't you worry, there's going to be some blood and gore that will be included. But this one, this is from an illuminated manuscript, and this is in fact a very underrepresented story, a very unusual story of St Jerome. And you can see, so this is sort of split into two sections, this image, and rather strangely perhaps we're actually starting on the right hand side rather than the left hand side, so it's perhaps a little bit counterintuitive. But on the right hand side you can see a saint asleep in bed, and this is Jerome, and then you can see somebody else sneaking into his room clutching this blue garment, and this is one of the other monks in the monastery in Rome where St Jerome resided for some time. And basically what has happened is that the monks in the monastery with St Jerome have got so annoyed with Jerome for his piety, and I think he was just a bit of a pain in the neck, frankly. So, pious to a ridiculous degree and no fun at all. And so they decided to play a prank on him. And so what this monk is doing is he's sneaking into his room with this blue dress, and he's putting it by the side of his bed and exchanging it for his habit. So Jerome, when he wakes up in the wee hours of the morning to go to matins, is it called matins? He reaches sort of half asleep and thinks he's got his habit and puts it on, and instead he's put the blue dress on. Isn't that hilariously funny? And he goes to matins in this blue dress, which is what's happening over on the left-hand side of the painting. So the lovely blue, of course, is also what I'm wearing today, is to stand out against all the brown of the monk's habit. Also forms this fantastic contrast between Jerome's beard. He obviously looks very manly, and then this lovely pretty blue dress is a complete shock. And you can see over to the left hand side the first couple of monks in the pew there having a little look at him and a little gossip. So presumably this caused much hilarity, and St Jerome was the butt of this big old joke. And that wonderful publication, The Golden Legend, we love The Golden Legend, don't we? The Golden Legend tells us that, in fact, it was as a result of this incident that St Jerome packed up and left Rome for good and went off into the wilderness. So clearly very, very pious, couldn't take a joke either. This image appears in a manuscript that was created by the Limburg brothers. Is that ringing a slight bell? The manuscript is from the very, very early 15th century. It's called the Belle Heure. And if the Limburg brothers are ringing a bell, that's because we've met them before. And in fact, we've met the patron of this manuscript, or the person that commissioned this manuscript before. So we met the Limburg brothers did this work. So do you remember this one? that same lovely blue. They obviously enjoyed using this blue. Had enough of that pigment. So this was the peasants. I don't have a close up of this one, but warming their genitals by the fire right over to the left hand side of the image. And the patron was this guy here, the Duke of Berry, who was that really horrible character, if you remember. So he was quite a nasty man who collected things, and he collected not only kind of possessions, but he also collected people. And so it's thought, so when art historians sort of analyse this work and think, oh, that's a really strange story to include, it's not very often included. It's one of the groups of people that the Duke of Berry liked to collect the most were young lads. Generally speaking, young lads that were way below his station, so he could essentially do what he wanted with them. And in this image, Jerome is wearing a dress, and to wear a dress in at these times in the medieval era was kind of connected to homosexuality. All very linear, I think, in these days in many respects. And so I'm just wondering whether that has some kind of connotation to to John, the Duke of Berry. I don't know. Also, it could pertain to the fact that St Jerome obviously wasn't particularly well liked, and he was a great proponent of virginity and so on, but was considered a little bit hypocritical because he actually hung out quite often with women, and his detractors said that that was because he was sort of trying to befriend them to have sex with them, essentially. So that also could be some kind of prod at St Jerome for those reasons. But an unusual story about St Jerome, not very often shown. So if you ever see a saint who is turning up to church in a dress and looking a bit confused and people are laughing at him, that's probably St Jerome. There we go. Okay, now we're going to move on to something a little bit more visceral, shall we say. And also, so this is prepare yourselves, this is a complete departure for me in so many ways. There we go. Not even medieval or Renaissance art. I very rarely stray past 1900, to be honest, but this just kept popping into my head. Maybe that's a bad choice of language. So this is called Self, and it is by British artist Marc Quinn. This particular image is a sculpture, essentially. This one's from 2006, and what it is Marc Quinn, he created some frozen silicon kind of masks, essentially. So I don't quite know the process he went through, but this silicone was then filled with a substance, and that substance is his own blood. So he has created a sculpture of his own head filled with about 10 pints of his blood. Clearly it has to remain frozen, so it has to be kept at minus 18 degrees centigrade, otherwise the whole thing just disintegrates. And he made 5 of them, I think. So he started in 1991, and I think Charles Saatchi owns the original, and then made them every 5 years up until 2011, which is when he did the last one. So this is from 2006. This is in the National Portrait Gallery. But it's just an extraordinary piece. They were all brought together about 10 years ago, or probably maybe 12 years ago now, in Basel for an exhibition. Yes, apart from the last one, presumably. Apart from the last one. Yeah, an odd thing. So it's it is a self-portrait to all intents and purposes, but of course then, because you have several different versions as he's aging, it's showing the aging process, and you know how art historians like to read things into things, because it has to be kept cold. Refrigeration and therefore electricity is an essential component to this artwork, really. So there are connotations with the fact that when Marc Quinn made the first of these heads, he was an alcoholic, and so people say, oh, okay, so this is talking about dependency, and also the sort of the transience of life, and how basically one flick of the switch and everything can go wrong. That's a bit miserable, isn't it? I tell you what, I wouldn't want to be the cleaner in that gallery. Can you imagine if you're happily hoovering around and suddenly you realise that you'd pulled the plug out or something, and Marc Quinn had melted? I mean, especially if you're in that exhibition where they're all together and they're all on the same plug. Ooh. Anyway, that's the kind of thing that Banksy might do, isn't it? Just kind of unplug if it was his own work of art. So there you go, a rare foray into contemporary art, Marc Quinn's Self, whenever the National Portrait Gallery reopens, which is going to be some years because it's closed for refurbishment anyway. You can go and see that. This is from 2006. 10 Pints of Blood. No wonder he only does it every 5 years. So to end with, we're going back to medieval times, back to familiar territory, and this very strange image. This is the image that I put on my stories. This is a beaver, obviously. I don't know whether that's obvious. It's a very big beaver, but it's very big because he is the focal point of this image. You can nearly always tell beavers in medieval manuscripts. This one is from the very early 14th century, because beavers are nearly always being chased by hunters blowing horns, by dogs, and very often they're in this rather odd position. What this beaver is in fact doing is biting off its own genitals, because beavers were hunted for their testicles, basically. And so legend has it that the intelligent beaver figured this out. And so legend had it that when a beaver was being chased, if they thought, okay, I can't actually escape this, I am going to be caught, to save their lives, they would bite off their own genitalia and they would kind of throw it into the path of the hunter. And so therefore the hunter got what he wanted without killing the beaver. It all sounds rather fanciful, but actually this is probably unlike do you remember the knights fighting snails? Unlike that, there is a grain of truth to this, because in fact the beaver does have a gland near to its testicles, or within its testicles, or somewhere in that region, that secretes something called castoreum, which had a lot of medicinal uses. And in fact, the Latin for beaver is castor. So now everyone's like thinking about castor oil, and yes, that does come from this term, but castor oil is no longer, you'll be very pleased to hear, made from beaver secretions. It's all plant-based these days. But yeah, so there you go, the beaver biting off his own genitals, which then begs the question, so what's this one doing? So this again is a beaver. I thought it was a fox, but it's not. It's a beaver, again from a manuscript. So this beaver has already been down the first path, so he's already been where this one is. And now, so what he's doing is he's going, no, you've already had me. You've already had me. I've already got it. Nothing to show here. Leave me alone. Or potentially it's a lady beaver, because I don't think that they had the same properties. Yeah, there we are. So from St Jerome to heads full of blood to beavers. What else are you going to do on a Thursday morning? I'm going to turn comments back on and turn pictures back off. turn on commenting. There we go. And no beaver jokes, please. It's too easy. And I do have some castor oil here. So this is not, oh, hello, London Boulevardier. This is not made from beaver secretion. I just want to make that very, very clear. This is all plant-based, so you don't need to be worrying about your castor oil. Love the dark journey. Oh, hi, Holly, how are you? Yeah, so we start off gently, and then it's like lobsters in a pot. Then we move on up to the weirder stuff. So thank you all very, very much for joining me. I will go away and think of some more crazy stuff to present to you next Thursday. Don't forget that we're no longer doing the Monday Elevenses, but I will be back if you're looking at Instagram on Saturday with another pepped up by paintings and curated canapes and cocktails. If you want to join see some wicked women, they're not all wicked as in villainesses, but just kind of wicked in many different ways. Speechless. I've made you speechless, Elaine. Oh dear. Oh good, maybe. So yes, join me for a Zoom tour about wicked women. That's on Thursday at 6:15. You can book. It's only £10, but you can book through the website. And I will see you back on Thursday. Blimey, says Ricky. You can all just go and find some manuscripts and go, oh yes, look, there's a beaver. Interesting stuff, isn't it? There you go. And people say that medieval manuscripts and medieval art is boring. Medieval art is really not boring. It's really not boring. It's fantastic. Anyway, on that note, I'm off. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. And I will see you live next Thursday. Bye. Thanks for joining.